So now we're going to talk a little bit about characterization. And to start us off, I want to describe to you how I developed the characters for my first book, Blind Hunger. Now, Blind Hunger actually started with a premise, and I'm going to let you know that most of the best fiction authors typically start with just the idea. And the idea for this was simply a question. It was, what would happen if all of the adults became zombies and everyone under the age of 16 was unaffected by that zombie outbreak? What would occur if your parents, if the police force, if firefighters, if all of those people that you rely on as a child to protect you, what would happen if they became the zombies? So this story began with that, and then from there I developed two central characters, Sage and Max, and then two additional characters, Brian and Kylie. And if you look at the actual chapters, you'll see that they are defined by character, because what that does is it stipulates the character's perspective from which that chapter is being told. And those characters were developed before I came up with any idea what the answer to that question was. Remember the question, what would happen if all of the adults became zombies and the children had to survive? I had no idea what the answer to that question would be. I started with characters and a question. So let's look at what that might entail. When you're creating your own stories, you want to start with characters. And those characters want to be as detailed as you can make them. What are their likes? What are their interests? What is their favorite color? What happened to them when they were in the 3rd grade? What size shoe do they wear? How do they wear their hair? Why do they wear it that way? Where do they shop? Where do they live? Describe them in as much detail as you can think of. Once you have a pretty good understanding of who your characters are, and this is a really rough shell, I would want to see something much more detailed than this for a character. For instance, the characters that I create tend to have 16 or 20 page biographies individual to them. And you'll find a prompt on that in your textbook. So once you have fleshed out the character and you know what every detail about that character's life, what drives them, what motivates them, that's when you can start introducing your question. What would happen if all of the adults became zombies and all of the children were food? And once you've introduced that question, that's when you can start introducing the concepts or the actions or the devices that will move your characters through your plot. So I'm going to show you that with this little toy called Story Cubes. They're 9 little dice that have different images on them, and each of those images represents a plot element. And you don't need to get story dice if you don't want to. They're kind of cool if you're into creative writing. So I've got these dice, and I'm just going to roll them, just like I would if I were writing a story. So I've got a magnet, a flower, a fire hydrant, a teepee, and a building. So from this, I can construct something that intercedes this plot. For example, man gives woman flowers after he puts out her fire using the fire hydrant outside of her house. What then would these characters do? What will she do if he gives her flowers? Well, she's interested in love, she's interested in romance, and she loves flowers, but she's been embarrassed by a kiss in her past, and she can't stand jokes. This guy jokes, and he's clearly making a romantic gesture, so how is she going to react? She does want romance, but remember that embarrassment. Is she going to maybe push him away at first and determine whether or not he's worth her time? Is she going to process that in more detail? Is she going to be upset by what he's done? Will there be no magnetic attraction between the two of them? So when you are developing your stories, what you want to do is think about your characters first, and then determine the incident that causes your characters to react, just like we talked about in the development of a literary plot. How will she react if he gives her flowers? How will he react if she rejects those flowers? So paint a good picture of your characters, know who they are and how they think, and that will make it a lot easier for you to determine what the trajectory of your plot is. one of the best things that you can do going into writing a story is to not have any predetermined ideas about what the end is going to be. If your characters are surprised by the ending and you're surprised by your ending, so will your readers be. So when you start with characters, start with a question, and then throw them into the mix, roll the dice and see what happens.